Well, guys, after 10 highly intense week, we have now finally come to the end. Hey guys, Kevin for American Crime Story, The People vs. O.J. Simpson, the season finale, episode 10, The Verdict, and obviously I was really looking forward to this episode, mainly because this episode had a job to do, and it was probably the hardest episode out of the bunch, because just like the beginning of the show, we knew what the verdict was going to be going into it. I mean, we've known since the beginning of the show that they were going to say Simpson was not guilty. Everyone knows that, everyone knows what happened in the Simpson trial. I mean, and that's the thing this episode is, how are they going to create suspense? How are they going to make us feel like, we didn't know what was going to happen? Because we did, in fact, know what was going to happen. But that's been kind of the thing with this whole series, is that this whole series, it hasn't focused on the case, it's focused on the characters, and for me at least, I think this was not only a very well done ending to the series, but I think a perfect wrap up of every single character. The way they tied things up, the way that they even showed you what these characters went on to, you could really tell they did their research. You could really tell they want to make the best ending possible, and they didn't want to just end this on some weird. They didn't just want to end it weird. They wanted to end it in the best way they possibly could, and they wanted to end it accurately. And I definitely really enjoyed that. And overall, I thought this was a perfect ending. Is it better than last week's? I don't know, because this was the wrap-up, and it was a very strong wrap-up, but after last week's, I don't really know if they could top it. I think this was right up there with the top episodes, 5, 6, 9, and 10, those are my favorite episodes of the show, and this one was definitely right up there with those, but let's just get into it, because there was a lot of things to get into in this episode. I have a lot to say, as you guys know. I surprisingly love this show. This was a huge surprise for me, but let's just get into it. Right away, we see Simpson is brought to Cochran and Carl, and Cochran tells him today is the day of the verdict, and Simpson asks Cochran how he looks. Cochran says like a star, and tells him he doesn't know what Ito is going to allow, but he knows Marsh is going to go crazy, and tells him if he starts talking to not stop, and basically is giving him the right to finally testify, because that's something that Simpson's always wanted to do. Ever since episode 8, if you remember, episode 7 actually, he says, put me on the stand, I'll say what you want me to say, and, basically, I'll try to defend myself the best way I can, and finally, he's being allowed to do that. So court starts, and Ito says to Cochran he has discussed to Simpson his right to testify, and Cochran says he has. Simpson's waiving his right, but, if the court pleases, he would like to make a brief statement regarding the waiver, and Marcia says that they object to the defendant making any statement other than the waiver, and Ito says he's not before the jury, and Marcia says that they are all aware of the realities and of the case. The problem with conjugal visits and telephone calls that are monitored on one side, and once again brings up the fact that most of the story has been fabricated by the defense, and it's not actually true, and obviously, we know this has really angered Marcia, and I like that we saw just one more bit of anger from her, one more conflict to deal with, because, yeah, it is definitely a problem, and basically, Cochran says it's still America and they should be able to talk, and Ito lets Simpson briefly speak, and Simpson says straight out he could not, and of course, these are famous words, which I love the way they did here, because first of all, he goes on to literally call out Marcia and Dart and say that you have no idea what you've done, how dare you accuse us of all these things, and basically tries to get the public to take his side, because he says he did not, could not, and would not commit this crime. He has 4 kids to them he hasn't seen in a year, and every week they ask him when he's coming home and how much longer it take, and Marge says if he wants to address misrepresentations of him and Nicole, to take a seat in the blue chair, they can have a discussion, and she doesn't want to talk about this. I mean, he's calling them out for their research when he really has no right to do that. I mean, he's been in jail. They've done tons and countless hours of research. He has no idea how hard they've worked, and he has no right to call them out for that. And Ito asks Cochran if the defense plans on calling any further witnesses, and Cochran says the defense rests, and basically, this is the final witness that they've ever called, and basically, we then go on to see the defense then meets, and I love the way that scene was done, though. Lee then talks about the jury and how he thinks one of them hates him, and Carl then tells Sean that Cochran just got another death threat, 1 out of 20, it's scary, and he needs protection, and he insists he hires someone, which I'm not surprised about, because obviously, I mean, so many people are watching this trial, crazy people, non-crazy people, obviously there'd be people targeting Cochran, just like there were people targeting Marcia, and I like that we saw that. This isn't a one-sided situation, and the show itself has never been one-sided. They've really focused on all points, and that's one of the reasons why I think the show has been successful as this, because it's really focused on all sides of things, and it didn't just focus on, how people viewed Marcia, but also how people viewed Cochran, which in many ways, I mean, is very similar to how they should view Marcia, because the difference with Cochran, obviously, is that there are a lot more people, I think, that appreciate Cochran than a lot of people that, think Cochran is doing something terrible and everything. They're not really listening to Marcia, but there are definitely those people that are in fact targeting Cochran, and he's working on his closing statements. And Darden and Marcia prepare to leave, and Gil tells them to nail this. Marcia gives a speech to the court, tells them that she appreciates what they're all doing for justice, and thanks them for all the sacrifice they've made. She then talks about the problems with Furman, and even though he's a racist, it doesn't prove that Simpson's not guilty. Because of course, ever since those Furman tapes have been released, that's what's on everyone's mind. Everyone's thinking about what Furman said, everyone's thinking about what Cochran said about the LAPD. That's what they're all thinking about. They're not really thinking about the trial. If you remember last week, I don't remember who it said, but someone, I think it was Darden, who said the line that this is not the Simpson case, it feels more like the actually no, it was Fred Goldman who said this is not the Simpson case, it feels more like the Furman case, because they were focusing so much on Furman. And I like that Marcia said, don't let Furman's racist assumptions cloud your judgment. Don't let what Cochran is saying, don't let that get into your ear. Vote how the way you want to vote. And I think that's kind of true with any jury. You don't want to ever be influenced by someone. You should always have your own voice. And I like that Marcia told them that, because yeah, it's true, they should have their own voice. She said there's an ocean of evidence that has been covered by the defense, and says all the things the defense have made up to make Simpson look good, and tells them to focus on the evidence and not the distractions, and goes over all the evidence they have, the most important being, and this I thought was very interesting, this is something that I don't think we really knew, but we've known since the first episode, but when Nicole died, Simpson didn't ask how she died, and that right there should prove that there's definitely something off here, because obviously, if, his wife was in trouble, he probably would have asked how she died, and he clearly didn't. So Darden then gets up, tells them to understand the crime. They first need to understand the relationship with Simpson and Nicole, explains them how crazy it was and how abusive Simpson was towards her, even finding out Nicole thought Simpson was going to kill her, which we knew how crazy this relationship was, but it never was as crazy, I think, as Darden says, and how explicit detail he said, and he never understood why the police did nothing, and, she never understood why the police did nothing about this, because obviously we know the police always took Simpson's side, mainly because he was a celebrity and things like that. Excuse me. And he says the case is not about the N-word, but the M-word murder. And I like that he talked about this, because yeah, they're too focused on the N-word right now. They need to not focus on what Furman says. They need to focus on the fact that this is a murderer, and he's not afraid to point to Simpson, says he did it, because the evidence all points to him, and basically describes the night of the murder in explicit detail, and says while he was a great football player, he's still a murderer. And I love that Darden didn't hold back. He said everything that needed to be said. He said everything that could have happened in the murder, everything that they know that happened, and pretty much all the information they had led up to this. I love the way that was done. Bravo to Darden for that. I mean, just really, really great stuff. So Cochran then gets up and says not one bit of domestic violence is tolerable, and Simpson is not proud of some of the things that happened during his marriage, but he doesn't see how it adds up to murder. And I do get Cochran's point, but again, you can just tell that Cochran is trying to do what he usually does, which is try to defend Simpson. And he says, while Darden talked about 1985, he missed the whole point. Something interesting happened in 1985, and once again goes back to Furman and says he hated the fact that Nicole and Simpson were married, and that Furman represents the entire LAPD, and tells jury their decision has major ramifications on the courtroom inside and out, and things like this happen for a reason in life, and maybe that's why they're gathered together. Something in their background and character tells them this is wrong. They might be the right people at the right time, and to say no more, they can't have this, and what the prosecution has done is disgraceful. Simpson's entitled to an acquittal. They have entrusted this case to a man who Cochran feels speaks like Hitler, which is very interesting, and in many ways, yeah, I do see the comparisons. A lot of what Furman says is a lot of what Hitler said, and I'm not saying that Furman is as bad as Hitler. I'm not saying that. He's probably just a big talker. I mean, we know he's done things, definitely, and we know he's hiding a lot of things, but I don't think, we know Furman's probably done some things as well, but he's not Hitler. He didn't have a Holocaust. He didn't put these people in concentration camps, but I do see Cochran's point that a lot of what he says is as bad as what Hitler says, and everyone seems to be ignoring that, and, as much as Cochran is, dramatizing a lot of what's going on here and really just trying to tell us the best story, because as we know, he wants to tell the most interesting story, I do get his point here, and basically says, he asks the people if it is any wonder why the glove didn't fit, because Cochran feels it wasn't his, and tells them that if they don't stop this cover-up, no one will, and says to send them a message and let them know their verdict will travel beyond these walls, and to remember the famous line, which I'm sure we all knew was coming. This is a line that I know everyone's talking about. Since the beginning of the show, I've heard people say this, and that is, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. He says about 3 times, and you can tell, he's really trying to get the jury to focus on Simpson is innocent. Simpson's innocent, and you don't know, he doesn't know if he is, but that was his job and everything, and After closing statements, Marsh tells Darden there's really nothing more they can do. It's now up to the jury, and they can't really say anything else. And Darden thinks that the jury could take forever. She says she's taking her kids to Santa Barbara for family time, and to call her if anything happens, and if nothing, to call her anyway. The defense talks about vacation, and once again, Shapiro feels out of place when he talks about going to get the heavy bag to take his frustration, and all the defense leaves without him, which, I gotta say, Shapiro in this episode, I felt the worst for. Two people I felt the worst from in this episode, Shapiro and Robert Kardashian. And I'll talk about why Shapiro right now, because Shapiro, if you remember, he was the one that Simpson really wanted to be his lawyer. I mean, remember, he didn't initially want Cochran, if you remember. He didn't like the way that Cochran spoke. He didn't think that Cochran was good for him. He thought that Shapiro would be the right person, and Shapiro wanted this to be a fact-based case. He really wanted this to be based on the facts. He, of course, wanted to, find the best way he can to obviously acquit Simpson and make him seem guilty, but he didn't try to fake a story, and that's exactly what Cochran and Lee have done. And now that he's no longer there, you can tell that he's no longer in that party, because he's now telling them do something completely different. They're not listening to him. He kind of just feels like the odd man out. It's really interesting. He feels like that one friend that was in a clique that's no longer part of it and now feels abandoned. I really did feel bad for Shapiro, and we know he's had ego. He let the ego get the best of him. He doesn't keep anything to himself, and that really is the problem with Shapiro, is that he has that ego and he hasn't done anything about it. And basically, the jury then goes to discuss what the verdict should be. They decide to use paper ballots to decipher if he's guilty or not. While many voted not guilty, it's clear few voted guilty. And the ones that do discuss why he could have done it. But you can tell that the ones that say guilty, they don't really listen to them, because, again, they're just listening to the not guilty part, because, as we know, they just want to get this done. They just want to get this done. They want to get out of there. And that's why it shouldn't be a surprise that the jury just immediately reaches a verdict, very quickly. And I love the montage when everyone's freaking out, from Ito saying, "Are you shitting me?" Because it takes a very long amount of time usually for a jury to decide this kind of stuff, and especially in the trial of the century, which lasted over 8 months, as we know. I mean, it's crazy to see how long this took, and we see basically everyone's freaking out because it's been less than half a day. Shapiro then gets out his car and asks Cochran what all the guards are doing there. Cochran says he doesn't take his safety lightly, especially not today. Shapiro asks why he needed Louis Farrakhan, and asks Robert if he knew about this, and he says he didn't till he got there. Shapiro says that these are the same people who thinks Jews are the devil and that his people have no claim to Israel. Robert says he has nothing to do with it. And basically, again, this whole thing with Shapiro being really upset because these people go against his religion and don't like people that are Jewish, and they want him to get into the van, but he doesn't get in the van. Not only because of him not being Jewish, but also because he's just not on the same side as them anymore. He doesn't want to be in this case anymore. He doesn't want to be in the side of things that's telling this fake story. He's always wanted to tell his story. He's always wanted to tell the truth, and they've always gone against him. He's always been outnumbered, and because of that, you can tell Shapiro no longer feels a part of this case, and it's really sad, but you definitely understand why Shapiro feels this way, and I definitely felt bad for Shapiro in this episode because of that. So, very sad stuff. And then we see the officer, Eddie, that's been watching Simpson in his cell. They kind of this nice moment where Eddie tells him he's been a pleasure to watch, and even asks him to sign a football for his kid, and Simpson says he can do that, and you can just tell it shows again, Simpson can never get away from fans. Literally, everyone is a fan of him. Everyone really respects Simpson, even though, and no one really thinks that he's this killer. Even though he is a killer, we know deep down he probably is a killer, because the show really hasn't given us any other options as to who could have been a killer. We have to assume that he pretty much is a killer, and there's really no other options available, and I definitely really like that we saw that. So Darden, Marsh, and Gil prepare to go to court for the final verdict, and Gil says that he thought it would take much longer than 4 hours. Darden tells her statistically a deliberation this fast spells guilty, and basically he's trying to make them think that they've won, and they pretty much think that they've won. And that's something I liked in this episode, is that, as we know, for the past 2 episodes, they have been insistent that we're losing, there's no way we're gonna win. They've just been thinking that the whole time, and finally it seems like this light has been brought to them, that maybe since the jury took so fast, that maybe they just are thinking, alright, Simpson is guilty, all bets are off, and that they've won. Which, that's the thing, we know deep down that they didn't, but the way they built suspense here, you kind of want them them to win. Like, the way this was done, you want them to win. You know it's going to be not guilty, but you want it to be guilty. And they also wait for the jury to arrive with the verdict. Ito asks for the jury and asks for the envelopes with the sealed verdict. They go over all the forms that need to be signed, and once Ito has the verdict, Simpson starts to shake, and the woman in charge finally reads the verdict as Ito tells Simpson to stand and face the jury. The crowd waits in anticipation. I love the way this was done with with us seeing like all the crowds and everything, and Eo tells Simpson basically to stand. Eo tells everyone to remain calm, and Robinson reads the verdict, and he's found not guilty. And I love how divided everyone was. You see, like, half of the courtroom is cheering in victory, that this is an amazing thing. Like, Cochran feels that he's really, accomplished something, and that he really got the point across he was trying to get across. While you see the Goldmans, such as, Goldman's mother, is crying hysterically. And it was very hard to watch this scene, because the people that are upset really feel like they're losing a lot, especially the Goldmans. You really understand their pain. I mean, they just wanted to find this killer. They just wanted to find the man that killed their son, and they knew that this man did it, and no one really seems to care. So, basically, very sad. I definitely thought that was a very sad scene. Very bittersweet scene as well, because you see Darden and Marcia, they're kind of frozen up. They don't really know what to do, and Ito then thanks all of them for their patience and how long they've been there, and I was surprised we got to the verdict as long as we did, but I'm honestly really happy we got to as long as we did, because remember, guys, this is like 30 minutes into the episode, and we're already on the verdict, and I'm happy we got into that, because the rest of this episode was the aftermath. Where do we go from here? What do we do after this? And I like that they did that. This is kind of like what 11/22/63 did with the aftermath, very much what American Crime Story did. There was a lot to wrap up. There were a lot of characters we focused on. There were a lot of storylines that were unresolved, and we needed to close those out in this episode. And I really feel they closed out everything. I don't think there was anything that was left open. It really seemed like they closed everything really well, and I definitely really appreciate that. And that's something that Ryan Murphy usually has a very hard time doing in his shows. And that's one of the reasons why I'm happy that Ryan Murphy didn't write this show, which I'll get into. But I do love how right away we go to Robert. He's like vomiting into the bathroom, and basically he knows deep down, you can tell that Simpson's a murderer. And the way we see Robert just changes in this entire scene, because for the rest of the episode, Robert is just visibly shaken. He has this look on his face. He doesn't want to be around Simpson. He doesn't want to talk about Simpson. He doesn't even want to do a press interview, because he knows deep down that Simpson did it, but he's not going to say anything because there's really nothing he can do. And you have to feel bad for those people that really can't do anything at this point. And basically, he looks at Marcia in deep sadness, not just because she lost, but also because he knows that she was right, and that no one seemed to listen to logic. They seemed to listen to how they personally felt, and didn't just listen to simple logic, because all the evidence was there. It's just the jury didn't listen to it, and just wanted to make a quick decision because they wanted to get the fuck out of there. That's really what it was about. So tons of press come to interview Simpson. The DA sit in bitter silence, and Gil says 20 years in service, and he feels his headstone will say that he lost OJ. And the woman told them press are waiting, and Darden says he just can't go out there. Gil says they owe it to the families. Marcia says she's so ashamed and starts to cry. And Gil tells her not to be hard on herself, wants her to know he admires her for what she did, which she doesn't feel as much, but he says that she was still in the case and for not letting the people of California get to her. Which I like that he brought this up, because yeah, that was a problem. I mean, for a while, we didn't know how Marcia was going to respond to those people, if she was going to let them get to her, if they were going to be a problem. And of course, as we know, they weren't a problem. Marcia just, pushed them aside like she pushed everything else aside, and I definitely really like seeing that. So Gil basically goes on to say that they are profoundly disappointed by this verdict, and I love the way this was done. Gil says something, then Marcia says something. They pretty much all the same thing, that they're very upset, but that they really want to remember, and that the jury's decision was clearly based on emotion and not reason. And he says none of them know the sacrifice they had to make. They are very proud of them, and they want to go out with their heads held high. And I love what Marcia says. She says that the case was fought as a battle for victims of domestic violence, and she hopes the verdict does not discourage the victims that are out there seeking help, and to not let this loss face in their system. But then when Darden goes on, he starts to talk about pretty much the same things that Gil and Marcia talked about. He goes on to talk about the Goldman family and all the great things that the families did for them and all that kind of stuff. But you just can't put how he feels into words. I mean, this is just too much for him. He can't just here and there. Like I said, he can't just put these things into words. They just mean too much to him. The words, he's already said what he needs to say, and he goes up to the Goldmans, he hugs them, and it's just such a bittersweet scene, because these are the people that we should feel the worst for. I mean, like I said, the Goldmans didn't do anything wrong. They were in this trial because they just wanted the person that killed their son to be acquitted, and of course he wasn't. And Obviously, they're very upset about this. I really did feel bad for them. And that scene is just, I was on the verge of tears. I'm not going to lie. I was on the verge of tears. But it really felt like something that Darden would do. Darden's always felt like one of the moral compasses in this case. Like, he's always been there to help out people. He's always been a shoulder to cry on. You know, with what happened with Marcia and what happened with anyone, really. Darden's always been the one to be there for them. And I love the way this was done. I love that he confronted, and I love that he was there for them. I just love the way that was done. And then, for whatever reason, some stupid reporter asks Gil if they're going to look for the real killer, and you can just see the look on Gil's face. The look on Gil's face is not one of, displeasement or one of overwhelmed. It's, how dare you say that to me? Why would you say that to me? After all we've done, why would you say that? You know we should have won, and you know that there is no other killer. It is Simpson. Gil knows in his heart that it is Simpson. But he's kind of at a loss for words because, one, they've lost. Two, there's nothing more they can do, and that's the saddest part with the Goldman scene, which I feel is the most tragic scene in this episode. They're escorted back to their car, they hear about the riots going on, they shut off the radio because they don't want to be a part of this anymore. They don't want to hear about it, they're disgusted, and Patty asks point blank, what are we going to do now? And just the scene where you see Patty ask that, and Fred's head just turn to the camera, just discouraged, and just this look in his face like there's nothing we can do. They're realizing that they're outnumbered. There's nothing they can do. Just like Shapiro, there's nothing they can, not only is there nothing they can do, but they have no other options really at all. They're out of things to do, and there's nothing really they can go on to do, and I really did feel bad for them because of this, because you have to feel bad for the Goldmans, definitely. So Cochran sees Darden and says he appreciates how hard he fought, especially the closing statements. This was war. He did a superb job, and he respects that. And you can see that Darden does not want to see Cochran. His perception of Cochran has completely changed in this trial, and I love that Darden doesn't really accept his apology. Like, he basically says, look, you're the one that made things such a circus. You changed a lot of things. You made the crowd, you got the crowd to think the way, basically, and he even says that all the crowd is going to think is that that he never left and he understands the situation. It's payback, and Simpson is the first to defend to get off because he's black. Cochran says people will see who the police really are, and Darden even says all the people saw was how well he twisted the system, and that isn't a civil right milestone anyway. The police will still arrest them and beat them and kill them. He hasn't changed anything for black people there, unless his famous rich one in Brentwood. There isn't anything he's really changed, and you can see that while Cochran feels he's accomplished something, he really hasn't accomplished much of anything. I mean, they've lost, but they won for what? I mean, Simpson is still a killer. He still is the one that killed. He still should be acquitted, and they focused way too much. Cochran focused way too much on personal reasons and not enough on simple logic. And again, it's not necessarily his fault. He's been through this all his life. We understand that. But I don't have much sympathy for him either, because he basically is the reason why this entire case turned into a media circus. Remember, Darden wanted to have things, he wanted to treat things respectfully. But Cochran even says, I don't want to, remember in episode 5, Cochran says, I'm not trying to play respectfully, I'm trying to win. And that was when, basically Darden said, okay, fine, all my respect for you is out the window. I'm not going to treat you like an equal. I'm going to go against you. I'm going to be hard. And that's why things got so intense, because Cochran completely denied, completely just, what's the word I'm thinking of? He completely refused what Darden was saying. He completely refused to be nice to Darden, to be civil to him, and he's not doing that at all. And that's why things will never be the same between Cochran and Darden. I really did feel bad for him. And Cochran even says that he wants to help him out, but there's really nothing more he can do. And Cochran then goes out. The defense are celebrating, including Dale, thanks the entire team for all their efforts. Sean tells him people are talking about him, and Cochran's excited because he doesn't have to run anymore. The news talks about what Cochran has said about the LAPD, including the president. Cochran says this is the victory. Their story is now out of the shadows, and basically he feels that they've accomplished all these things, which, like I said, they have, but in many ways they haven't. And then we get this great last scene between Marcia and Darden. I love the way this was done. Marcia's cleaning up her office. Darden comes in, asks him if he saw outside people are celebrating Simpson, and he says he says that he's gonna resign. He doesn't want to do this anymore. And in many ways, I can understand. I mean, this case really did get the best of him. He says that, this is not him, and she says he's lucky. It isn't maybe he needs to have something inside of him, something he needs to make right and avenge. And we've known stuff about Marcia before. We've known a lot about her. We've known that she's going through divorce. We've known that this case was very personal. And we really now know the reason why this case was so hard for her, because it was hard for everyone else. But Marcia, it always seemed like it got the best of her. It always seemed like she was really emotional and always crying and things like that. And we find out right here a secret that I think we already knew, because I believe Marcia did confess it on like live television, but she confessed in front of Darden that she was raped when she was 17, and it was in Italy by a waiter, and she buried it, and she didn't forget it, but Sora just kept her mouth shut, and when she had her first rape case, she had to deal with it, and it was hell all over again, but in a way, it made something very clear to her, that she has something in her that wants vengeance for victims, and that's what justice is to her. That's why she's been such a big supporter in this idea of justice. That's why she's wanted this to go right. That's why this case has basically taken over her entire life, because the main thing she wants is for justice to be done. Simpson abused his wife. Simpson did all these terrible things to her, and just like Marcia was raped by this waiter, nothing happened to him. And it's a very sad scene to find out, but now you know why Marcia feels so defeated, because twice in her life, she's had a very personal experience, and nothing has happened. And she says all they heard and all they knew was a man who beat and terrorized his wife until he just snuffed her out, and they let him go for reasons that have nothing to do for what he did to those two people. He doesn't know why they were there, and she doesn't know why she's there, and he asks what happened to the waiter, and she says the same thing that happened today, absolutely nothing. He asks what she wants to do now. She asks if it's too early for a drink. He says it's not. They go out to get one, and you pretty much think that they're just going to walk away. They're done with this life. They don't want to be in anymore. They're done with this case, and they're going to go on with their lives, and I'll talk about what they go on to when we get to the ending, when they talk about what everyone's doing now, but basically, I love the way that was done. Perfect way to close out things, and I love that we end this episode not in the way we'd expect, because I was thinking we were going to end it with Marcia and Darden. I mean, it'd be the most logical place, right? They've been kind of our two main focuses, but no, we finish it with Simpson, and it would make sense because we started out this entire thing with Simpson. This entire case has been built around Simpson, so it would make sense to focus on Simpson, but I love the way this was done, because you see Robert waits for Simpson to come back. He's visibly shaken, and he just doesn't want to see him. I mean, Simpson's relieved that it is all over. He hugs Robert, thanks him. He says he was always there for him. He never doubted. Tells me he has a surprise for him, something special. The first day he was in there, he gave him a Bible. He knew how much it meant to him, and he gives it back to him. And Robert cries, and it's not because he's happy Simpson's back. He's crying because he knows that Simpson should be in jail, and he's crying because he couldn't do anything, and that he personally feels that he was on the wrong side of the case. Like, he shouldn't have defended Simpson. He should have gone against him, and I feel like Robert feels if he would have maybe gone against Simpson, that they could have possibly won, because Robert had so much evidence. As you remember, he did so much research to find out why, who else could have been the killer, and he found nothing, and that would have been the perfect statement for the jury. But again, the jury didn't vote with logic, they voted with emotion, and they voted with what Cochran told them to do, because Cochran is such, like I've said, an empowering voice, the way he can just talk to people and bring them in. I've said that before. So Simpson says they've won. It's time to celebrate. They get in the van. We hear many newscasters talking about the aftermath of the trial. Robert asks what he's going to do first. Simpson says tonight they're going to party, and Star Magazine's going to pay $800,000 for the exclusive right to take photos. He says he's done dealing with the trial of the century, and tonight they're throwing the party of the century. He says he's back. A crowd of people scream at Simpson to go back and leave Brentwood. You can tell their appearance of him is completely different. Nobody really treats him as a celebrity. They treat him now as a killer who should be in jail, and his family welcomes him back, minus Nicole's kids. He then takes a shower. He looks himself in the mirror, and then he starts crying. And I feel like that scene, he kind of knows that he should be in jail. Like, he's just thinking, yes, I am a killer. I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here. And he's crying because he's relieved, but also because he knows deep down that he did kill. And he kind of regrets it, you can tell, definitely. I mean, he's human. He obviously regrets it. And I love the way that scene was done, because while Simpson's acting so happy, I think deep down he's really thinking, why am I innocent? Why am I, why are people thinking I'm innocent? Because I'm not innocent, and I did do these terrible things, and people shouldn't forget I did these terrible things. And I love the way that was done. Really good way to close out how he feels about himself. And we've always known there's something psychologically not right in his head, and I feel like that's what it's always been, that he's always known that he's a killer, but he's denied it because he can't really face reality. And I feel like that moment is him realizing, I'm a killer and I need to face it, but I need to move on and pretend I'm not a killer. So he's basically playing off this act that he's not a killer when deep down he knows he is. And that's why I loved the rest of these scenes, because we see Simpson watches Barbara Walters interviewing Shapiro about using the race card, and while Simpson's disgusted, he doesn't care, tells him it's time to party, makes a reservation for tons of people. Simpson asks who all these people are, AC says he doesn't know, and Simpson wonders where most of his friends are. They're all gone. Even Kato isn't there, who Kato we know is one of the most supportive people in his life, who always was there for him. He's not even there because, again, the public's, the public's vision and the way they depict Simpson and perceive him has completely changed. They don't perceive him as this great guy. They perceive him as a killer and someone that should be in jail. They know that he killed. And Simpson makes a speech, says he's relieved the nightmare is over. His first obligation is to young children, Sydney and Justin, assures them they will be raised the way Nicole and him intend them to be, and then when things settle down, he will pursue as his primary goal in life to find the killers of Nicole and Goldman. Whatever it takes, he will bring them in. Everyone seems to think he's guilty, especially Robert. I mean, no one's really clapping. What I love about this is that people are clapping like slowly, but no one really seems like, yeah, this guy definitely is legit. Everyone seems like he is not telling the truth. And Robert especially leaves abruptly, no longer seeing Simpson in the way he once did, and this just kind of breaks Simpson, because Jason tells dad the hotel he wants won't take him because they don't want him there. I mean, things just aren't going well for him. Simpson then steps outside. He looks to the statue, remembering how he once used to be, and realizing that's not how he is anymore. And that's basically the end for the series, but then we kind of go on to see what everyone's doing, and I like that we saw it. I mean, this was something that they had to do. We know the movie's done it. I've never really seen a TV show do it, because I haven't really seen a lot of TV shows about things like this, where they portray real-life stars and things like that, but I like that we saw it. I thought it was very well done. We see Marcia Clark, we found out, resigned from and I'm going to go in order of everything they said. Marcia Clark resigned from the DA's office and became a mystery novelist and a legal commentator on TV. And we find out that Darden had this university. Gil was defeated in the 2000 re-election. Ito pretty much remained a judge until 2015. He's now retired, and he's only, which I found this interesting, he's the only person in the Simpson trial to not write a book. And we find out that Robert always had doubts about Simpson, and he pretty much stopped speaking to Simpson, and it kind of broke him, and he died of cancer in 2003. And you gotta think that Robert probably was just off for the rest of his life, kind of just, thinking, what can I do? How can I, make it sure that Simpson is brought to justice? Because I feel like Robert always wanted to say something, but he didn't, because Simpson, he was always the closest to Simpson. He was always the person that defended him, and he felt like he should have said something, but he never did, because he didn't really know what to do, because there really wasn't much he could do. And then we find out, of course, about the Kardashians and how they've gone on to do TV, but also Faye Resnick and even Kato Kaelin. I didn't know that these two were on reality TV, but apparently they were. Cochran continued to work as a defense lawyer until he died in 2005. He now has his own firm. Shapiro also practiced law in West LA. Trial has represented many celebrities since. And then probably the most interesting for me was what happened to Lee. Basically, Lee was disbarred for attorney misconduct in Florida and Massachusetts, who Shapiro testified against at his hearing. And honestly, it would make sense for Shapiro to do this because of the fact that Shapiro was outnumbered, the fact that Lee tried to fabricate the story. He didn't try to stop Cochran anyway. And in many ways, he encouraged the Cochran do this. I mean, he didn't try to stop him in any way, and you can definitely tell. And I can understand why Shapiro testified against him, definitely. But that's really interesting. And we also find out that Alan Dershowitz is still one of America's leading attorneys, and he doesn't even feel the Simpson case is one of the most interesting aspects of his career, because when you really look back, Dershowitz did really not much of anything, as we know. Scheck founded an Innocence Project, which focused on using DNA evidence to overturn wrongful convictions, and because the 20 men have been freed from death row. Furman, of course, was fired from the LAPD, and he's also gone on to be a best-selling author and Fox News commentator, and is the only conviction on charges as a result of the Simpson case, so very interesting with Furman. And then Lou and Judith Brown, Nicole's parents, they tried to get full custody of Simpson's kids, but Simpson got full custody, and he actually moved out of California with the children, and now Simpson is finally convicted in Las Vegas for stealing, but it's not for the killings of Nicole and Goldman. It's for actually stealing sports memorabilia, and he's even eligible for parole in 2017. It's really maddening, the fact that no one has ever come out and say, hey, Simpson might have killed them. But again, there's really nothing they can do. The verdict has already been determined. There's nothing more they can do about that, and that's something that irritates me. It really does. But again, you can't rewrite history. You can't really change it. And I like that the show didn't try to change it, because a lot of shows, they would try to change it. They would make him guilty. And I'm glad the show stuck with the story, because that's what's most interesting, is the fact that no one has done anything still, even though they know that Simpson's guilty. No one's done anything. Simpson's now guilty for something that has nothing to do with Nicole and Goldman's death. It's kind of payback, but Now he's going to be on parole, which is interesting. And we also find out that Fred Goldman filed a civil suit, and in 1997, not 1977, 1997, a jury found him, Simpson, liable for the wrongful deaths of Goldman and Nicole, was ordered to pay $33,000, but received less than $500,000. And I love the way the series ended with the real pictures of Nicole and Goldman, and that is how the series ends, and what a perfect ending. I love the way everything ended here. I thought everything was perfectly wrapped up. I don't think there was anything they didn't touch on. Nothing. Even little things like Shapiro. I can understand if someone said, oh, Shapiro didn't have enough or something like that. I really feel they touched upon everything they needed to. We focused on everything. We got through, we saw how everyone is after the trial. We saw what they go on to do. They really focused on everyone. I really love that. And what I love the most about this show, not just the fact that it stayed completely true to all the events and didn't try to change anything, because many shows I think would, is that it was completely character-based. It was never based on the case. It was all based on how it affects these characters and what it does to them physically, psychologically, mentally, all that kind of stuff. I love the way they did that. Amazing stuff, and especially into Ryan Murphy series. The one advantage I think the show had the most, that Ryan Murphy did not write the show. Ryan Murphy is not a bad writer, but for something like this, it would have been a complete disaster had Ryan Murphy wrote it. He directed this, and you definitely do see some of that Ryan Murphy essence in there, hence the jury scene very much reminded me of the judges' scenes in Glee when they were determining sectionals and things like that. To be honest with you, that's very much what it reminded me of. You definitely felt that in there, but it never felt like a Ryan Murphy show. It felt like a true crime series, and I definitely really enjoyed that, and it felt realistic. It never got too off the rails. It never got too cheesy, and that was something I thought going into this was going to be. I thought the show was going to be boring. I thought the show was going to be cheesy, but from the first scene, it just hooked me, and it kept me in there. It got better and better as it went on. I think it got more and more interesting. Every character was incredible, and there's so many nominations that the show deserves. I mean, Sarah Paulson, without a doubt, is going to be nominated. Courtney v. Vance can be nominated. But the biggest question is, how do we top this? Because I know next season is Hurricane Katrina, and I don't really know if they're going to be able to top this, because this was just so well done and so realistic, especially for a first season. Not rocky at all. There was nothing wrong with this first season. The only complaint it has, you guys know, is that jury episode, which wasn't even bad. It just wasn't as interesting as the other episodes. That really is my only complaint, is that the jury episode I never really felt was as necessary as we needed to be. We didn't need an entire episode focusing on the jury. We could have just done what we did here and focused on them for a little bit amount of time, and then have the rest of the episode focused on what we wanted, and I really enjoyed that. But like I said, next season is going to be Hurricane Katrina. John Travolta said he does want to come back and maybe play himself, but how do they really top it from here? I don't really know if that's possible. I mean, there's a part of me that feels like, yeah, they can top it, because I didn't feel like this season would work, and it did. But then I'm also thinking, I mean, how do you really go from here? This was a subject that was very hard to portray. They portray as best as they could. I think they got all the evidence. There really wasn't anything, and like Ryan Murphy said in the beginning of the show, there'd be a surprise every episode. I'm like, yeah, right, Ryan Murphy, because he said that with Scream Queens, and there really was. I mean, there were so many shocking events about this, and there were so many things we didn't know that I love. Like, look back at the first episode. There are so many things that we never knew till that first episode, and I love that, and I think that was very well done. And not that there weren't people that knew them. I mean, they were just kept hidden, and nobody really knew about them, and they wanted to tell that true story in this series. They didn't try to hide anything as well. Like, there wasn't anything they tried to filter. They didn't want you to think Simpson was a good person or a bad person. This is one of those things where we're going to present to you all the evidence, and we want you to see how, what you think is right. And I really think that's what this show is about. And like Marcia said, it really was also about justice and what that does to people and the drive that people have. Because, when people go in the law, they have reasons for doing it. And Marcia's reason was justice. And I definitely really enjoyed that. I think the show's also gotten Marcia Clark to be more respected. Because I know there are a lot of people didn't like Marcia Clark, who I did hear was kind of a bitch in real life. But I will say, from those pictures, it really showed how great of a job they did casting everyone. I mean, those pictures looked very realistic. And they looked very much like how they did in the show. I definitely really enjoyed that. I thought that was really well done. But overall, guys, that's the end of American Crime Story, People vs. O.J. Simpson. I am so hyped for next season, but like I said, I don't know how next season's going to be. I don't know if they're going to be able to top it. I honestly think this was better than American Horror Story. I really do. American Horror Story just can't do what this show did. It didn't have as good as a cast. It didn't have as good as writing, and I'm also interested in seeing, are they going to do the American Horror Story thing where they bring people back and things like that, or are they going to take a True Detective route where they just get a completely new cast, which hopefully works, as we know True Detective, that really didn't work very well at all. all. But overall, guys, let me know what you guys saw of this season. Love to hear your thoughts. And then what did you think of the way everything was wrapped up? Was there anything you would have done different? Because honestly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I will see you guys in my next video, which will be for Awkward, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.